Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Todd Menard, and today we're going over the White Mountain and surrounding area real estate market statistics for the week ending October 21st. Let's get right into our numbers. Taking a look across the board, we have 98 days closed on market this week, 7.35 months supply. Absorption rate was at 13.60. Average list price this past week, 456,122. Average sale price this past week, 439,905. And our list price to sale price retention came in at 96.44. Taking a look at active inventory, sitting at 1,003 available properties. Pending is at 19 and closed units month to date at 88. Taking a look at active listings, new listings taken this past week, 34, brings our days on market for active to 123.1 and for closed at 98. Looking at the lower left-hand side where we get to see the price range statistics. The top half of this is the active inventory, the current available inventory. This shows exactly the contractions in red. It doesn't show how many were reduced, but it just shows you by 2.79% was the 0 to 249,999 market. And it's currently sitting at 174 days on market. So that's how you'd read that. Days on market to the right of that is that particular market segment. How long is that market segment taking for those properties? How long have those properties been on the market? We look at the lower section, which is the closed units. This is closed month to date, and we're sitting at 0 to, as you can see in here, the 0 to $249,000. There were 15 properties that have closed so far month to date, and they were averaging 46 days on market. You can see each category in the days on market for those particular categories that are associated with those price ranges. So let's take a look at our spreadsheet where everybody gets to be the expert. Why? Well, we get to have week over week comparisons. We get last year, same week comparison, and then we get to see our three last previous months and both a reflection of that month plus a year ago, that same time period. But we typically focus on this section right now until we get to the month end numbers where we'll then change to go into October as we get to that point. But right now we have 34 days, 34 new listings taken this past week. 35 listings taken last week. So we're pretty close, and we were pretty close to the week before. I think there were 36 taken 2.5 weeks ago. So as a result, we're staying ever so slightly right in that 34 to 35 bracket. Last year, the same period, they took 36 listings. So again, this is commensurate with what's going on at that time frame. Taking a look at what our active inventory is made of, there's 1,003 units available right now versus 1,013 the week before. There was 1,047 properties available this same week last year. So our market currently just week over week is down about 1%. So we look at what is comprised, what is that total inventory comprised of? One coming soon property, 80 condo townhouses, 5 factory built homes, 198 manufactured homes. Sorry, I moved my little thing around here too much. There is 2 modular homes, 58 park RV, a little bit of a contraction there, 3 plex, 2 ranch and farm, 655 site-built properties. There are 53 new construction homes in the market right now. And of course, these aren't from new construction, might not include all of the numbers because not all of the new construction reports through the MLS. So, but most of it does. So in this particular case, that's a relatively accurate number. We take a look at pending. We're sitting at 19 right now. Quite a few properties have closed. There's 30 that were in the market pending last week. Some of those closed, maybe some of those didn't. We had 19 last year. Ironically, we're at 19 right now. That's pretty good. So again, very consistent. What you felt as a realtor last year, what you felt as a seller last year selling, what you felt as a buyer last year trying to purchase, you're feeling the same thing right now, same period of last year versus same period of this year. Taking a look at close, we're at 88. We were at 112 last year, this same period. So we're lagging a little bit, about 21.4% behind the market from that perspective. But again, I don't like to speculate too much on closings quite yet, because as you know, most of the product usually closes in the 4th week of the month. Now, that being said, sometimes there's carryovers. Sometimes properties, if they close the day after the 1st or something like that, sometimes they can still do all the prorations as of the prior. But when it comes to reporting, whatever day it closed, if it's in the new month, it gets reported in the new month. So even though it might have been written and for all practical purposes recorded in the new month, it doesn't matter what the prorations are. It's going to be recorded in MLS based on when it was actually closed. So 88 versus 112. Again, there's no REO or short sale properties that were included in that mix. So currently we're sitting at a 7.35 month supply. Again, remember 6 and more is considered a buyer's market. 4 to 6 is considered a neutral or transition market where we're going one way usually or the other, or we're just kind of in what I like to call to the victor goes the spoils. In other words, I like to look at that as whoever's got the better negotiator, whether it's a lister, a seller, or a buyer, whoever does a better job negotiating is really the one who ends up with the best deal in the 4 to 6 month windows. We're at above 6 months, so right now it's really a buyer's market. Sellers are having to give a little on the list price, but we're going to talk about that in just a second. So we go down now to the median price, $445 this week versus $454, down $9,000. But again, this is representative of just those few properties that closed in the last 7 days. So this isn't month to date. That will come at the end of the month over there in the blue column. But what we're looking at is just what's changing rapidly. And the reason why that might be capricious, but still is a valid number, is because that valid number lets you know, and you're going to go put an offer on a property, you want to know what just took place last week. It's not like, it took place 60 days ago. It's irrelevant almost at this point, the way these markets are going. So what are we talking about right at this? Well, let me get down to the bottom, and then I'm going to give you the secret sauce, if there is one, for this week anyway. So taking a look at median price, that came down a little bit. Looking at days on market, this is the big change. The sold market moved from 122 to 98. We were only at about 112, 99 to 112, somewhere in that range, typically. So when we saw the 122 last week, you probably remember me saying, oh, well, that shot way up. Let's see if that's going to stick around, and it didn't. It's gone. It just happened to be, some of those properties. But remember also, when we're dealing with average days on market, we're still sampling only those properties that closed last week. So it basically means when it jumps like that, the product that actually closed had just been sitting on the market longer than the week before. And so that's why that number jumps so greatly. And again, why we really, when we get down this lower section, we look at the blue months, the end of month, to really see the true trend versus just capricious nature. So the last number, and the one that I wanted to talk about, as I tell you the secret sauce for the week, is this. The sellers are retaining 96.44% this past week. That was up from 95.07. What does that mean? That means that at the time the seller accepted the buyer's offer, right at that time, not by the time, but at the time. At the time the seller accepted that offer, what was the difference between the list price at the time and the price that was in the offer that now becomes the contract? So in essence, there's this other number called original list price. And of course, that's the number where people sometimes list their property a little higher, maybe because they're personally intrinsic about it, or that the real estate agent says to the seller, listen, we'll list a little higher because I know you think this, but if we don't get any traction in the first 30 days, we're going to have to drop the price before the property gets stale and people don't look at it. And so, but list price to sale price is at the time that the seller accepted it. So here's how the benefit of this works. Is that what you would do is you take a look in the neighborhood, just that one neighborhood. If you're in Torreon, just Torreon. If you're in in one of the Woods Canyon, just Woods Canyon. If you're up in Taylor, just Taylor. If you're over in Lakeside or Pine Top, just that area. But you want to try to get it down as small of a presence as possible in that neighborhood, because here's why. So what is the average seller giving up on the list price in that neighborhood? Now, in this case, it says 96.4. So if we were picking on a particular neighborhood, the number came back at 96.4, then what we can say is in the last reporting period, last 30 days, last 60, whatever you're putting in there as a range, the sellers are only keeping 96.44% of the list price, which means the average seller is giving away 3.5% off the list price. Now, in contract negotiations, we know, and if you're a seller or buyer, you should know, that in the terms of the contract, there's also this other thing called seller concessions. How much is the buyer asking of the seller to pay towards their closing costs and settlement fees? Now, that can be inclusive of all the fees that a buyer has to close. So the intricacy of packaging your buyer is this. If your buyer, you don't just go in and ask for the world just to ask for the world. You can do that, but sometimes you might create a competitive relationship with the two parties versus a collaborative one where a deal could have been made, but because of attitudes, it's not going to be made. We've all seen those types of transactions. So what you want to do is you want to make sure you're focusing on what the buyer truly needs if you're a buyer's agent. The lender more than likely gave you a settlement sheet that said, this is what the buyer's needs are. This is how much the buyer needs to bring to closing. They've had a conversation. That also includes compensation. And they look at it and the buyer says, I can't afford that. This is what I can afford. So now you take what they can afford and you go into your contract negotiations and you build into that document what the buyer needs. If the buyer needs more assistance, then it might not make sense for you to discount the price and discount the concession. Now, that's a delicate balance. So how do you know if you're doing the right thing? There's another, in your MLS, there is another button that is called the seller concession amount. And if you go in and look at the seller concession amount, it tells you what on that particular property. So once you've got your isolated properties closed in the last 3 days, maybe there's 3 of them. So now you look at those and you find out that, yes, they negotiated 96.4 as far as list price to sell price, but on the concession side, there was either 0 or there was 1% or there was 5%. So all of those things are important because if I'm giving up 5%, what did the seller sell the house for? That's available data for you. Well, they didn't get any negotiation whatsoever. So what you're basically hearing is that the buyer needed the money to negotiate in the concessions, not off the list price. Not everybody can get both. Sometimes you can, but you have to go in there and you have to look at what these numbers are. So if in essence the sellers were giving up 3.5%, and yet at the same time they were also giving 3%, well, that's 6% to the buyer's benefit. A reduction of 3% plus 3% built into the closing cost. A lot of things can happen. Maybe you could have used that discount instead of discount because properties appreciate, right? 4% a year. You could go in and you could use the full 6%, taking 3% to do maybe a permanent rate buy down, or maybe a 3-2-1-2-1-2 temporary buy down, or maybe you could have used that money as the lender describes to pay off a particular debt and get a better overall fixed rate. Again, there's so many different ways. Maybe the buyer wouldn't have had to pay MIP. That could have gone towards MIP or PMI. So these are or VA funding fee. So all of these different things go into packaging a buyer. And that's the real importance of how you can use these numbers to really become that expert realtor and certainly the master negotiator for your buyer's behalf. Sellers, you better be agents and sellers, you better have been doing the same identical thing. So when that good offer comes across the table, you're not offended by a good offer. You know what the difference is between a good offer and a ridiculous offer. And it's not always one that wants both, but you compare to what's going on in the neighborhood and maybe one property outside the neighborhood for appraisal standards. And you see what's going on just around that area to understand what the average sellers are having to do to make a buyer close on to incentivize a buyer to close on their property. Because right now, remember, it's a buyer's market. You're above 6 months supply. So all these things matter as you're doing that. I hope this helped in some particular way. This is, an education opportunity, not an exact science, but this is what works, and this is how you do become a master negotiator. Thanks, everybody. I'll talk to you next week. Good day.